Hello. Let's take a look at automating the database save process in eHealth. By default, when you install eHealth, there is no scheduled job or scheduled save of the eHealth database. There are two ways that you can save the database. You can save it manually. You can do that from a command line by running the command save db. Um, and to get usage on an eHealth command, you'd use a -h. And we see that there are quite a few arguments, but the relevant ones for an -savedb is -p for path, and the type, which would be a full backup or an incremental backup. And these are binary backups. A full backup does a complete save of the DB, and an incremental backup picks up on the back of the last full and does a difference. So it takes up much less space and goes much quicker. Um, but the disadvantage, in my opinion, of a binary backup is that it is hardware and operating system and path specific. So if you do a binary backup, it can only be restored on the same machine or on a new machine with the same operating system and the same path structure as the existing machine that it came from. The other option is an Ascii save, and an Ascii save again saves the full database, but it's a transportable save, meaning that it can be used in troubleshooting on labs or in migrations from one machine to another where the operating system changes or the path system may change. So for our purposes, we're going to do an Ascii backup. And the usage we would use is nhsavedb. And the -p argument we talked about, for me, I'm going to put it on the root of C in db save. And the type, and I choose to do an ASCII. And that's really the only arguments you need. If you run that command right now, it will go ahead and save the database for you. It'll take too long and too many resources for this demo. So the other option to do it would be to do it from the GUI. You would go into Tasks and Information, Database Management, Database Save, and here you could call it from a command line. Again, you would use basically the same steps. You would browse. By default, it puts it in the nhome db save directory, but for our purposes, we wanted to put it on the root of C in db save, and there's the folder db save. And we'd give it a directory name, and typically for interactive, you would name it the date or something similar so that you could tell it apart. And then you have your choices. Full binary we talked about, and if there was a full binary already available, it would give you the option of an incremental, but because there's not a full binary, you can't do an incremental at this point. And then the full ASCII. When you select the full ASCII, there are two arguments, fast and compressed. And those are old arguments which are no longer needed to be used because they're called by default with nhsavedb these days. So if we were to run that, again, it would do the same thing as the command line. It would save the database in a full ASCII in the CDB save. And if we go back to our command line, that was the argument that we were going to use that I deleted. So what other option is there? There is the option to schedule it. And we can schedule it again in two ways. We can do it from the command line. We would use the command nhschedule. And it gives you the usage, all the different types that you could use. And we could do it from the GUI. And we don't want to save these changes we were just demonstrating. So a scheduled save would be seen here, and you'll notice by default there is no scheduled save here. So if we did a new scheduled save job, and that was a right-click option in the empty field. And this looks very much like the interactive GUI. There's the difference being the schedule window is now added. So again, we would browse, and the default is nhome db save, but we wanted to put it on C. So we would browse to C and put it in db save, and we would give it a name. And in this case, we would give it the name daily because we're going to run it every day. Again, we choose the full ASCII and we unselect fast and compressed. And you have your choices here of frequency. By default, all of the days are populated. You could also select or unselect any day you wanted, or you can choose a monthly and change the day to whatever day is important to you. For our purposes, we're going to do a daily. Next, we'll choose a start time. The start time should be whatever makes the most business sense for you. The DB Save does not pause the database, but it does take a lot of resources because it's basically copying the DB to flat files. So it's going to take a hit on your disk input output. So I schedule it for a time when there's very little traffic, and at 1 a.m. Because we're on Eastern time, most of our systems are not being utilized. So that would be the option I would do. When you fill out the parameters, the OK button becomes available. So you say OK. It does give you a chance to back out. And you can save that. And we see that we've got a new saved database job. And it's got a job ID that ends with 7. Type daily. It is enabled. Another place you could look at that. Oh, by the way, and there's the command nhsavedb -p -ascii. And that's the arguments we discussed earlier. You could also come back up here into Scheduled Job Management, Scheduled Jobs, and on the All tab, you would see the job we just added. There's the ID that ends with 7, database save, daily, yes, 1 a.m., and there's our arguments. So that's how you would add it through the GUI. Now, I'd also like to take a quick look at adding it through the command line. So the first thing I want to do is delete it just so that we can see it again after we've added it. And then if we go back to scheduled jobs, it'll refresh when we open it, and we see the job with the 7 on the end is gone. Okay, so now if we go to a command line and we look at NH schedule, and the relevant arguments for NH schedule are the type of job and the time to run it, the frequency to run it, and any arguments that you would use for the type of command that you're calling. Okay, so for our purposes, we're going to do a DB save, but we're not sure what type that is. So if we do NH schedule list types, we'll see the different types. And for our purposes, we're going to do a database save. Notice it's database with a capital D and save with a capital S, and there is a space in the middle. That'll become relevant in a moment. And the command it calls is home bin nhsavedb, which we already talked about. So we're going to do an NH schedule. In our purposes, we're going to schedule instead of delete or modify or what have you. The type will be database save, but again, I mentioned that there is a space in that, and because of the space, we're going to use double quotes, and this is case sensitive. And then the other argument that's relevant is when, so dash time. We'll do 01 a.m. And then we have how often, and we're going to do daily. The other option would be monthly. Now for daily, there are 2 arguments, Y for yes and N for no, and 1 for each day. So if I wanted it to run only Monday through Friday, I would put N, 5 Ys, and then N. But in our case, we're going to run it every day, so we'll put 7 yeses. And then finally, we need the arguments. And remember, in our type list, we saw that it's calling nhsavedb. So our arguments are going to be the same ones that we passed in the GUI. We're going to put a single quote around the arguments, and we're going to use dash ASCII, and then dash P for path, C, DB save, and then close your single quote. So there is basically the same information that we passed through the GUI using the NH schedule command. And so we'll hit enter. It'll process. We see that it's got a new job ID and that the job ID is 8. The last job was 7. Once a job is created, even though we deleted it, that job ID is used up, so it took the next incremental value. Now if we come and we go to schedule database saves, we see our job is now here. Job ID, the type, daily yes, meaning it's enabled, the start time, and again our arguments, ASCII and path. And if we go to scheduled jobs, which refreshes when you call it, and we'll see that it's up to 19 again, and we have it all listed here again. So there's your 2 options to schedule any eHealth job. For saving the database, you can do it manually from the command line using NH schedule, or you can do it directly through the GUI using the scheduled database saves interface. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for attending.